1. I started my career working in sawmills back in 2007. I was hired for a portable sawmill in southwest Washington state. This mill was located quite literally in the middle of the forest. It was constructed in the early 70s, and even in the short 30 years of its life, it seemed to have a decent amount of history inside it. I worked the weekend graveyard shift, 2:30 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. the following day, on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. I was a trim drop operator. I had a partner who I worked with, and we were the only two in the area. His name is Pete. We would take turns rotating through the night. One of us would run the drop, where you would drop out bad boards, chunks of garbage, and just about anything else that couldn't be made into quality lumber. The boards that would be left to be processed would enter a lugged chain system, and then be pulled through a scanner, and then a trim box that would cut the lumber to length, and then take them to the next area, which was the sorter. The other of us would sit at an operator's console about 20 feet away, and watch monitors that displayed various parts of the machine and process flow. We rotate every few thousand boards to keep from being fatigued. One night I was running the drop, and Pete was kicked back at the console station, reading away at the newspaper. Everything was going just as normal as ever, when I glanced over and noticed him peering up at the monitor for the outfeed with a puzzled look on his face. He jumped up and went walking down to the trimmer sawbox and looked around it, at the outfeed. He then walked back, looking quite concerned, sat down, shrugged, and then started reading again. This happened a second time, and by now it had my attention. I threw up the skids to stop the flow of lumber, and walked over to him and asked what was up. There was a guy standing at the outfeed. I went down there to see what the hell was going on, and when I got over there, he was gone, he said, with a confused look on his face. This didn't make sense because this was an area that wasn't accessible unless you stop the machine and activate a catwalk that unfolds from the outfeed to the sawbox to allow access to a small platform on the opposite side of the machine as we operated from. I asked him to point out where the guy was hanging out. Pete pointed to the platform, slightly frustrated. I shook my head at him and laughed, before running back to the drop to continue running lumber. Pete stayed fixed on the monitors now, newspaper folded up and thrown to the side. Not but 5 minutes go by before he jumps up and runs down to the sawbox outfeed again. This time I threw the skids up and followed him. By the time we got there, there was nothing. He pointed across the lumber table, which was 30 feet wide, to the platform across the machine and yells, "Who's over there? You aren't allowed to be over there, goddammit!" Both of us waited to see the man he had seen on the monitor, but once again there was nothing. After a minute or so of looking on, we decided to move back to our stations. I walked by the console station, glancing at the monitor, seeing nothing, and Pete followed shortly behind. By the time I made it to the drop to start running again, Pete howled. I snapped around and saw him stabbing the monitor with his finger, yelling for me to come look. I ran over and looked into the monitor. Sure enough, there was a guy. He was standing on the small platform Pete had pointed out. The monitor is small, grainy, and black and white, but we're able to work out that this guy is wearing a tin hard hat, a very dirty and worn button-up long sleeve with the sleeves either rolled up or ripped off, and very thick denim jeans of a dark color. He's just standing there, with his elbows on the handrail, looking on at the lumber from the sawbox. "Wait here," Pete yelled as he stealthily snuck down to the outfeed once again. As he closed in on the outfeed area to catch this guy, red-handed for being in an area you can't or shouldn't access while in operation, I looked back and forth at Pete and the monitor. About the time Pete made it to the sawbox, the man on the monitor looked up into the camera and, literally, just faded away. I completely lost my shit. I felt a cold chill run down my back, accompanied by all the hairs on my arms standing up. I sprinted as quickly as I could to Pete, exclaiming, "That ain't a guy! It wasn't a fucking guy!" Pete just stood there, dumbfounded, both of us now looking at the platform with our own eyes. "What should we do?" I asked, quite disturbed now. Pete crossed his arms in thought, before deciding we should call our foreman down and tell him this story. We walked back to the operator's station, and Pete grabbed the mic of the radio and called for the foreman. We ran until he arrived, both of us ready to bolt for the sawbox in case we saw the entity again. The foreman showed up after about 5 minutes, and we stopped running and explained what had happened. The foreman didn't look impressed, but he was smiling. He explained that we had just seen one of our old-timers. Back in the late 70s, we had a man who worked here. He ran the chip bin station, and one day, arrogance got the best of him, and, long story short, he got buried in a chip pile and was crushed and suffocated before help could dig him out. The foreman said he was one of the only people to ever work here and wear a tin hard hat, as homage to his previous career as a logger in the woods. Other operators have had occurrences where they've witnessed this entity wandering around different machines, seeming just watching the flow of lumber. 2. About a year and a half ago, my parents moved out of their townhouse and started renting a new place since the mortgage was getting on top of them. I wasn't living with them at the time. I was living with my sister in a private rental near Glasgow in Scotland. We were living there so that we could attend college in Glasgow throughout the week. Our flat wasn't up to much, and was full of mold and was just a pile of shit. This isn't really relevant, but by God it was. We kept getting blamed for the mold inside, even though the building was ancient, and the roof was leaking. Anyway, on with the story. My parents moved into an old gamekeeper's cottage in the middle of a Scottish glen, surrounded by fields, trees, rivers, and plenty of wild animals like rabbits, pheasants, sheep, deer, and loads of birds of prey. Now, when I say the cottage is remote, I mean the most remote you can think of. The closest village is 11 miles away, and the winding dirt track road to get you there is full of twists and turns that make you feel sick. You're pretty much guaranteed to run over some rabbits and pheasants, though. The cottage is beautiful, though, and it has quite a big garden, although the fencing around it has gaps so that we get plenty of rabbits and pheasants running about, moles digging holes too. So ever since my parents moved in, they've had a not creepy vibe about the place, but a strange feeling about it. My guess is that it was built in the early 1900s, but it could have been earlier. My mom has probably had the most paranormal experiences, but I too have had some of my own. My mom has had many paranormal experiences in her life, including seeing her 2 deceased parents at the end of her bed, telling her that they were okay. She's not a total believer in ghosts as per se, but she does believe there are some sort of entities out there. One time, my mom was left in the house on her own with the dog, as I wasn't living there and my dad was at work. Now, you hear all sorts of things living out in the middle of nowhere, animals rustling about, shooting, etc. But my mom heard a strange banging coming from upstairs. She shook it off initially as some gamekeepers out shooting pheasants, but then she heard it again. The family dog, too, getting a bit suspicious. My mom grabbed a knife from the kitchen and slowly crept upstairs, thinking there was a home intruder. But there was nothing there. She swears to this day that it sounded like footsteps. Another experience was actually told to me by my dad. He was in bed late at night when he awoke suddenly. He looked over to the bedroom door and saw a shadowy figure almost hiding there. He thought nothing of it at the time, but he's seen it more than once. He said that it looked like an elderly man with a white beard and a flat cap. but he'd always disappear. My dad went to work one day too, and he has this drawer where he keeps keys for the store at his work. He always keeps the keys in the same drawer and keeps it locked. He came home one day from work and found these keys in his pocket. To this day, he swears he never even touched the keys that day. Myself, both my parents, and my sister have experienced some strange paranormal activities that has been recurring for a while now. It's like that feeling of a dog rubbing its face off your leg. I'm not saying there's like a dog ghost here, but we used to have a black Labrador who was the craziest but most loving dog ever. We all had a great connection with him, and we all miss him very much. Maybe it's him? But maybe it was the gamekeeper's dog. I don't know. My sister and I moved into the cottage after we finished college, which was about a year ago now. My sister has also had a strange experience in the past, but that was at a different house, an old Victorian in Angus. She was lying in bed one night when she felt a tight grip around her throat. She said it felt like a rope was tightening or someone's hands strangling her. She turned over after it wouldn't stop. And it did, just like that. I know this sounds ridiculous and feel free to laugh. But I put 2 pieces of bread in the 4-piece toaster at the back, and I heard it pop, only to see one of my pieces of bread had jumped into the front 2 places, but it was diagonal to where it was. Which is weird, as usually it would just jump in front. I know it sounds fake and stupid as fuck, and maybe me just overreacting, but I swear to God it's true. I'm quite skeptical when it comes to all things paranormal, but I can't explain any of these things. Just so you know, I'm not a bullshitter. I'm not making any of this up. All of this stuff actually happened. Personally, if there is a spirit of an old gamekeeper living here, he's a nice spirit, and a bit of a joker. I've never been afraid of whatever entity lives here, and I'm glad he or she doesn't mess with us too much. 3. I'll try to keep this short and to the point. These things happened at a rehab center in Pennsylvania. I know. A bunch of alcoholics and drug addicts in early recovery can't be reliable sources, right? The rehab actually used to be an old hotel in the 1930s. And although many new buildings have been erected since it became a rehab, the bulk of the activity happens in what used to be the hotel. The facility is located in bumfuck Pennsylvania, and is situated on a very large hill, almost like its own little mountain. It is very isolated and secluded, and to give a sense of the size and scale of the property, walking from the bottom to the top is an extremely exhausting ordeal. The scenery is beautiful, and is often referred to as Magic Mountain, due to its magical ability to help alcoholics and drug addicts recover from the disease, not because magical or paranormal activity occurs there. This rehab is actually considered to be one of the top 5 centers in America, and it certainly is not cheap. I only say this because when you're in one of the newer buildings, it doesn't feel strange at all, but when you're in the old hotel, it just feels different. Not scary per se, just different. I attribute that to the fact that it's clearly an old building and it's just darker and damper in a way. One morning, a buddy of mine named Joey told me that in the middle of the night he woke up and saw a dark, shadowy silhouette approaching him in his bed. His roommate confirmed that he woke up to Joey yelling, "What the fuck?" and throwing his pillow. Joey claims that once he threw his pillow at it, the figure disappeared. Joey told the counselor, who works the 3rd shift, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., about what happened, and the counselor said he has experienced numerous strange things during the middle of the night. The counselor mostly just sits in his office throughout the night, monitoring the security cameras, and doing periodic bed checks to make sure that nobody tries to leave. On one particular night, he noticed on the computer monitor that one of the exit doors by the nurse's station was open. He proceeded to go try and close the door, but as he was approaching it, he saw a dark, shadowy figure standing in the threshold. He then said he walked backwards, trying not to take his eyes off of it, and returned to his office, and remained there for the rest of the night due to fear. I was, and still am, skeptical that he was just messing with us. But the emotion he showed while telling the story was convincing. Plus, stories about this place are not few and far between. These aforementioned two events did not happen in the old hotel, by the way. They occurred in one of the newer buildings at the top of the mountain. Another one of our counselors, who used to be a patient there, told us about an experience he had there while a patient. This one took place while he was staying in the old hotel, which at the time was the young men's unit. He was actually there alone at the time, with another counselor because everybody else was off on an overnight fishing trip. He was watching TV when he heard footsteps coming from upstairs. Thinking that maybe someone else stayed behind, he went up there to see who it was, but found nobody. At this point, he assumed it was the counselor, but when he went back downstairs, the counselor was in the kitchen. 10 minutes or so went by, when he heard footsteps again, accompanied by the sound of a drawer closing. Now, he thought that some younger kids were rummaging through the rooms looking for cigarettes. Other people can gain access to the upstairs via an enclosed bridge that connects the old hotel to another building, which is really just an office building. In order for them to do that, they would have been able to gain access to the office building that is off limits. Either way, that was what he thought was happening. However, when he got upstairs, he didn't see anybody. But as he was looking around, he heard a door close from one of the bedrooms down the hall. He followed the sound to where he thought it was coming from. But the only closed door led straight into an empty room. Since this place was a rehab center, caffeine was a hot commodity. We were only allowed 1 cup of coffee and 1 cup of tea a day. That being said, tea bags were like gold in here. If you had some extra bags of tea, you were a rich man. One of my buddies said that he opened the door to his bedroom, and as soon as he entered, one of his stashed bags of tea just fell to the ground. He knew it happened right at that moment because he heard it as well as saw it. The weird thing is that it wasn't next to a desk or table or dresser that it could have fallen off of. He said it slid right down the wall. His explanation was that somebody stuck the tea bag to his ceiling or wall as a joke. Who knows? But I honestly can't think of a reason why somebody would waste their time doing that. And then for it to fall the second he entered the room would just be dumb luck. This one is likely a simple malfunction, but it's still interesting. One morning, the counselor was brewing a pot of coffee before most of the patients woke up. He supplied the machine with the ground coffee beans and filled the pot with the normal amount of water, about 3/4 full, and then poured the water into the top of the coffee machine and placed the pot back underneath to catch the brewed coffee. However, the coffee didn't stop. It just kept going and going and going, as if he used 4 full pots of water. It just kept going for way longer than it should have based on how much water he used, until coffee was all over the place. I've seen this man make coffee before, and I assure you, he knows what he's doing. This time was different. Lastly, I will share about what I experienced. I didn't really feel, see, or experience anything too out of the ordinary, although I was wary and just aware of weirdness. Honestly, kind of hoping for something to happen, based on the stories that were often so shared. On numerous occasions, 4 times to be exact, my t-shirts would fall off the hangers in my closet in the middle of the night. I never saw them fall, but I honest to God heard it fall on one occasion. But I noticed it every time because we would have room checks in the morning. And if 3 or more rooms failed to check, then we would lose privileges. Coffee, ping pong, TV, music, etc. Room checks consisted of making sure your bed was made, no clothes were on the ground, and your desk and bathrooms were clean. As I would make my bed in the morning, I would scan the room and make sure everything was put away. As I mentioned, I was kind of on the lookout for strange occurrences due to all the stories. So after finding my t-shirt on the ground the first or second time, I purposely made sure that they were all on the hanger correctly, and sure enough, they fell to the ground in the middle of the night, numerous more times. I could sit there and tug on my shirt with more force than a draft of air could apply, and they would remain on the hanger without even a chance of coming off. I don't know. It was just bizarre. I tend to be a skeptic about these types of things, and I'm often one of the first people to accuse somebody of lying when telling stories of paranormal encounters. But something about these stories just struck me as sincere and hard to explain. 4. I've worked graveyards at this gas station since February, transferring from a different store. From the first night, I felt watched and heard stuff rattling in our drink coolers, but I chalked it up to paranoia from working nights in a new location. I didn't mention it to my boss because I didn't want to be labeled as the weird third shift person. The weird feelings and the rattling went from about once a week to once a night, and finally things began falling off shelves when I thought no one was in the store. I would hear a distant voice from time to time, so I finally mentioned it to my boss, thinking maybe someone was sneaking in to steal things somehow. She kind of laughed and said, "Oh, that's just the ghost." I thought she was just putting me on, but apparently she had been waiting for me to mention something. I've seen videos since then that has me totally convinced he's actually in the store, but I was still skeptical for a while. He's been steadily getting more and more active as the months go by, with something happening every night. Whether it's his shadow passing through the coolers, slamming doors, moving things around, or just being a general nuisance of himself. It used to make me wary, but now it's mostly annoying, as every time he knocks something off, I am the one that has to pick it up after his dead ass. There were a couple of days where I would straighten something on the shelves and move on to another item, and he would shove the thing I just straightened off onto the floor. I would go to fix that, and the thing I had been working on elsewhere would fall off. The thing that interests me is I got frustrated one night because he threw down a bag of chips onto a section of the floor I had just mopped, and I said out loud, "I swear I will call an exorcist right now if you don't fucking stop." The cooler door closest to me flew open and slammed twice. There was another incident when the doorbell rang on its own while I was with a customer, and it startled her. After she left, I said, "Don't go scaring my customers off now." The doorbell immediately rang again, and then was normal for the rest of the night. I'm pretty sure he's aware of things, and he likes to make trouble for people working nights. Though if I mention to an empty store that I really don't feel well, he tends to go quiet that night. He's very, very active, and I'm wondering what you guys think of the situation. Is there some way I could open a line of communication with him? I'm so curious about why he's at our store, and he seems like he's got a sense of humor. Especially now that he doesn't spook me anymore. 5. When I was a kid, I was raised in a very abusive home. My favorite time of the day was the time between when the school bell rang and when my mom would show up in her beat-up blue family van, because I got to spend that time with my favorite person without having to worry about any adult that might try to ruin our good times. I met Ireland at school in the first grade, and I loved being around her. She was the same size as me, which really helped because I was always scrawny and got made fun of a lot. She taught me how to make flower crowns and encouraged me to climb to the top of the geodome and then hang upside down by my knees. I remember being really scared, but I did it, and it felt great. I kind of figured we were in the same boat because she always had a bruise on her arm, but didn't want to talk about it. It didn't matter. We played. We had no keepers at this time of the day, and could just be our goofy selves. We often played princess, and there were lots of times I envied her dress. It was pink with little green flowers all over it, and had a full skirt that came to her knees. She had puffed shoulders, and it was trimmed in lace. Ireland herself had reddish brown hair, and blue eyes like my sister. She was really pale and thin. So was I, so I never thought much about it. My dad had instructed the lunch ladies that if I didn't eat all of my lunch, to not let me go outside and report back to him, which usually resulted in a swift and painful punishment. One particular day, a lunch lady spotted me and Ireland playing. She was taking trash to the dumpster behind the playground and asked me what I was doing. I told her we were playing castle and the dragon was going to get us. She stopped and cocked her head to the side and just kind of stood there. She asked if someone was with me, and I noticed Ireland had headed home. So I told her she was here, but she left. She scolded me and told me not to talk to myself. It wasn't ladylike. I just said, "Yes, missus," and left it at that. The next day I ate all of my lunch and was allowed to venture outside for recess. Ireland was out in the playground already, which was a rare treat as I didn't normally get to play at recess. We played hard. Next to the playground was a huge field that we used for kickball and gymnastics. We started running and playing, so carefree. We were so wrapped up in what we were doing that I never heard the bell ring. By this time we had drifted far away through some brush and into the woods where we became fairy princesses. After a while I got thirsty and was ready to head back. Ireland grabbed my dress and wanted to stay. We got into a fight and she grabbed the hem of my dress and wound up tearing it a little. I got really mad at her. My mom was going to kill me. I stomped back to the soccer field and realized, in my childish play, I hadn't paid attention to the bell, and there wasn't a soul left on the playground. Everyone had already lined up and headed back to class, and I knew I was in big trouble. When I got back to class, I checked the clock, and I was over 20 minutes late. My teacher asked me where I had been, and I explained that Ireland and I had been playing in the woods and lost track of time. She sent me to the principals, who had me repeat the same story. My elementary principal was a really jovial, nice man who never scared me and always had a kind word. After he listened to my story, he asked how old Ireland was. I told him I didn't know, but she went to school here. He asked me what she looked like, so I described her. He sat for a really long time, looking out the window at that field, and then turned and nodded and sent me back to class. A couple of days later, Ireland and I made up. I had been giving her the silent treatment because I was mad I got into trouble, and she didn't after she encouraged me to play in the woods. We were playing after school one day, and my mom comes strolling around the corner. She asks me why I wasn't waiting for her, and I told her I forgot. She asked me who I was talking to, and I explained I was talking to Ireland. She just looked past me and shrugged. She was really mad I had made her get out of the van to come looking for me, so she dragged me away by my arm and half waved goodbye to Ireland. A couple of days later, I got called back to the principal's office. When I walked in, my mom was there with our school counselor, and the principal explained he was worried about my friend, Ireland. My mom started screaming that I wasn't behaving and didn't stop until Mr. F, principal, gave her a stern warning that she was only making things worse. He explained that they didn't have any students named Ireland, and that some of the staff and teachers were concerned I was making up stories. They had seen me talking to myself and playing by myself, and he just needed to know what Ireland looked like. I told him exactly what she looked like. I told him her favorite color and what we talked about. The counselor started to explain to my mom that sometimes children have imaginary friends and it takes time to grow out of these things. I insisted that she was not imaginary because she ripped my dress when she didn't want me to go back on time to class. My mom lost it. She insisted I was being difficult and making it all up. We went home where my dad told me I was not to talk about Ireland ever again. The next day, after school, I found Ireland. I told her how much trouble I had gotten into and how no one believed she existed. I urged her to go with me right now and tell a teacher. She said she would after she climbed up the geodome. She was on top and I was underneath, waiting on her to climb over the stupid thing so we could go to my teacher together. About that time, my mom comes around the corner of the library. She starts yelling at me in the middle of the playground to just stop it. I point up at Ireland, who is literally hanging above me, and try to explain this is her. This is my friend. My mom stops and gets really quiet. She drops down to her knees and tells me there is no one there and I need to stop this right now. She dragged me home and made me switch schools. We were never allowed to talk about the girl in the pink dress with the green flowers again. It came out in my teenage years that 20 years earlier, when my mom, aunts and uncles attended that same elementary school, a little girl had been murdered and buried in a shallow grave in the spot at the edge of our soccer field. Her parents had been immigrants from Ireland, and she was picked up on her way home from school. The person who found her body was a young Mr. F, who then was a math teacher. The case remains cold. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, Episode 10. Big thanks to all the individuals who allowed me to use their stories. And big hugs and welcomes to all my new subscribers. And massive thanks to my existing subscribers for sticking with me. Let me think, how long have I been doing it? I think it was November. I started doing this last year. Closing in on a year. I think I've come a long way since then. I'm very pleased and very proud of the progress I've made with this channel. Of course, now that I've brought it up, that does mean I'm probably going to have to do something to celebrate the year. Well, I've got, this is August, September, October, November. I've got till November. Got a couple of months to think about something. I've also got, let me think, September. Yeah, in September I'll be uploading another 30 stories video. What I could actually do is, because I want to try and do them about 2 months apart. Yeah, I could probably do one in November as well. That'd be roughly 2 months between them. Yeah, that should work. I'll try for that. I've already got the first few stories I need, so that's starting to shape up quite nicely. And I'm shooting for mid-September for that. I'll try and upload it before my birthday. I'm 35 in September. Oh, I know, I'm getting old. But that can only be a good thing, I say. And with those words, I'm going to jet now. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.